I would like to invite you to read this article with me by Swiss Policy Research about why Israel created Hamas. That's right. Israel created Hamas. Insider insights into the creation of Hamas and other designated terrorist groups. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am just going to go over a few quotes in here and some, highlight a little bit. So we have a quote here by Benjamin Netanyahu. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. That's 2019, Benjamin Netanyahu. And here's a quote by IDF Major General Gershon Ha-Cohen, which means priest, of course. In the visible dimension, Hamas is an enemy. In the hidden dimension, it is an ally, quote unquote. Quote, Israel started Hamas. It was a project of Shin Bet, unquote, by Charles Freeman, U.S. diplomat and ambassador, 2006. So why Israel helped create Hamas? Let's just read this section at least. Since the founding of Hamas in 1987, Israeli, American, and Palestinian officials have repeatedly acknowledged that Israel did indeed help create and fund the Islamist group. The point made by many of these officials is not that Israel allowed the rise of Hamas or that Hamas emerged in response to Israeli occupation of Palestine. Rather, their point was and is that Israel's intelligence agencies actively helped create and finance the Hamas group. As the officials cited below make clear, the overall goal of supporting Hamas has been to thwart the creation of a Palestinian state and avert the implementation of a two-state solution to the Palestine question. From Israel's perspective, a two-state solution would reduce Israel's territory to the internationally recognized pre-1967 borders, prohibit any future territorial expansion, and prevent the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. More specifically, supporting the Islamist Hamas group has served several Israeli objectives at once. First, it undermined Yasser Arafat's secular nationalist PLO. Second, it helped prevent the implementation of the 1993 Oslo Accords. Third, it undermined the Palestinian National Authority and isolated Gaza from the West Bank. Fourth, it impeded Western support for the Palestinian cause. And fifth, it justified Israeli counterattacks on Palestinian territory. In other words, by secretly supporting a group that does not recognize the existence of the State of Israel and does not accept a two-state solution, Israel does not have to accept the existence of a Palestinian state and does not have to support a two-state solution either. Now, I'm not going to go over this theory. Be a creature of Israel. The following sections provide a chronological overview of insider statements on the creation of Hamas made since 1981 by Israeli, American, and Palestinian officials. These officials include a former Israeli military governor of the Gaza Strip, an Israeli military intelligence chief, two Israeli intelligence whistleblowers, a retired IDF major general, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and other Israeli politicians, as well as former American government and intelligence officials, late PLO leader Yasser Arafat, and an early Hamas leader. David K. Shibler, in his book Arab and Jew, reveals in his book, in regards to the Gaza military governor Yitzhak Segev, he says this: politically speaking, Islamic fundamentalists were sometimes regarded as useful to Israel because they had their conflicts with the secular supporters of the PLO. Violence between the groups erupted occasionally on West Bank university campuses, and the Israeli military governor of the Gaza Strip, Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, once told me how he had financed the Islamic movement as a counterweight to the PLO and the communists. The Israeli government gave me a budget, and the military government gives to the mosques, he said. Yeah, I believe that's kind of like, controlled opposition. And funding it? Yeah. So, David Shipler reveals more in his New York Times information. He says, Nicholas Kristof is right when he mentions that Israel once allowed the rise of Hamas as a counterweight to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, but Israel did much more than, quote unquote, allow. In 1981, Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, Israel's military governor of Gaza, told me, Shipler, that he was giving money to the Muslim Brotherhood, the precursor of Hamas, on the instruction of the Israeli authorities. The funding was intended to tilt power away from both communist and Palestinian nationalist movements in Gaza, which Israel considered more threatening than the fundamentalists. Judging by a distressed phone call I got later from the Army spokesman, General Segev's superiors were not happy with his disclosure of a practice that did not look very clever, even at the time. They thought incorrectly, but apparently wished that he had made his comments off the record. Okay, now this one by Israeli intelligence whistleblowers, Ari Ben Menashe, says, quote, the slush fund helped finance the intelligence community's, quote, black operations around the world. These included funding Israeli-controlled, quote-unquote, Palestinian terrorists who would commit crimes in the name of the Palestinian Revolution, but were actually pulling them off, usually unwittingly, as part of the Israeli propaganda machine, unquote. Excuse me. In his 1994 book, The Other Side of Deception, former Mossad case officer and whistleblower Viktor Ostrovsky revealed how the Mossad secretly supported Hamas. So, supporting the radical elements of Muslim fundamentalism sat well with Mossad's general plan for the region. An Arab world run by fundamentalists would not be a party to any negotiations with the West, thus leaving Israel again as the only democratic, rational country in the region. And if the Mossad could arrange for the Hamas, Palestinian fundamentalists, to take over the Palestinian streets from the PLO, then the picture would be complete, unquote. There's lots more here. I wonder if we should keep reading, or maybe you should just go read it for yourself. This is interesting. I think I'll read it. In March 1997, John F. Kennedy Jr. published an article by Gweila Amir, mother of Yigal Amir, the alleged assassin of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Gweila Amir recalled the Hamas terrorist attacks in the wake of the 1993 Oslo Accords signed by Rabin and provided some evidence that her son was part of an Israeli intelligence plot to remove Rabin and prevent the recognition of a Palestinian state. John F. Kennedy Jr. died 2 years later in a mysterious plane crash. You think that had anything to do with it? I wouldn't doubt it. Quote, in September 1993, the Rabin government signed the Oslo Accords with the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO. The Accords and the series of terror bombings by Hamas that followed their implementation brought thousands of previously apolitical Israelis into the streets and onto the barricades in embittered protest. These neophyte activists poured into the pre-existing right-wing groups and placed themselves at the disposal of experienced organizers such as Shin Bet informant Avishai Raviv. One of these new activists was my son, Yigal, unquote. Do I need to keep going? I think we made our point here. Let's read one more here. Or maybe we'll keep reading, I don't know. In a February 2001 article, American news agency UPI revealed how Israel gave major aid to Hamas, quote unquote, quoting several current and former U.S. government and intelligence officials. Israel and Hamas may currently be locked in deadly combat, the Second Intifada. But according to several current and former U.S. intelligence officials, beginning in the late 1970s, Tel Aviv gave direct and indirect financial aid to Hamas over a period of years. Israel, quote, aided Hamas directly. The Israelis wanted to use it as a counterbalance to the PLO, unquote, said Tony Kordsman, Middle East analyst for the Center for Strategic Studies. Israel's support for Hamas, quote, was a direct attempt to divide and dilute support for a strong secular PLO by using a competing religious alternative, unquote, said a former senior CIA official. Funds for the movement came from the oil-producing states and directly and indirectly from Israel, according to U.S. intelligence officials. The PLO was secular and leftist and promoted Palestinian nationalism. Hamas wanted to set up a transnational state under the rule of Islam, much like Khomeini's Iran. Quote, the thinking on the part of some of the right-wing Israeli establishment was that Hamas and the other groups, if they gained control, would refuse to have anything to do with the peace process and would torpedo any agreements put in place, unquote, said a U.S. government official. Quote, Israel would still be the only democracy in the region for the United States to deal with, unquote. He said former State Department counterterrorism official Larry Johnson told UPI, quote, the Israelis are their own worst enemies when it comes to fighting terrorism. They are like a guy who sets fire to his hair and then tries to put it out by hitting it with a hammer. They do more to incite and sustain terrorism than to curb it. I don't even know if we need to read any more of this, but I would encourage you to go and read the whole article. I think it's very good. It's very revealing. And it's time that we had a really healthy look at what Israel's been doing. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day. Bye.